Alright, whoa, this sounds really loud. Episode 114. We're trying this for the third time. I tried shooting this twice last week and the camera kept shutting off on me, so I'm just gonna pray it works today. And hopefully it doesn't sound as loud as it sounds in my headphones right now, because it sounds really loud. But what is up, everybody? Today's title of the podcast is going to be Don't Step Over Dollars for Pennies, right? And this is something that I see far too often with people when it comes to all things in life, not even just related to health and fitness like I'm trying to focus on today, but I'm going to try to dial it down a little bit more on the health and fitness side and give you guys examples of what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of times where we obsess on the details of things and the little nuances that we think are going to make things work, and when in reality, if you were to just master the basics and do those consistently forever, you would probably have more success than 99% of the world. And that motto is something that you'll hear me mention a lot in today's episode. Just don't step over dollars to go pick up pennies, right? Now, that being said, the first thing I want to kind of start off today's conversation with is I am a huge believer that the details do make a difference, right? And something I say in the team all the time, it's like a little inside thing, is like, hey, the difference is in the details. That's what's going to make us great compared to every other gym or trainers, is like focus on those little details, right? So I don't want to like say that details don't matter and like pretend that there's no point to focusing on those things, because in reality there is. But the entire point of today's conversation is the foundation is something that you can stack the details on top. But if you don't have the basics mastered and the foundation mastered, doing all the other high level details, it's not going to really matter, right? So let's get to start from the top of the food chain here with the 6 dimensions. We're going to start with mobility, right? Mobility is something that I will say I've fallen victim to this, both as just from a personal kind of training side of my own work, and then also what I do for clients, of making things a little bit too complicated. And I think with a lot of areas in my life, I've realized that the more educated I become in a space, or the more I learn, or the more certifications, the more I'm kind of surrounded by that information, sometimes I actually make it too confusing for myself and for those around me too that I'm trying to teach it to. I've always been a big believer. It's like if you can't teach it, you really don't understand it. And nutrition, I think I was probably the worst, but mobility would probably be a close second for me. So what I mean by that is our like release length and strength, and we've talked about like, okay, we do some release work, which is soft tissue, trigger point, massage stuff. Lengthening is going to be some type of corrective stretching or stretching in general. And then the strengthening part, which is going to be the big part, which is basically, you know, strengthening the antagonist part of the joint or the muscle or the pattern that you're trying to improve. Now, if you were to think about in today's relationship of, okay, if I don't want to step over dollars for pennies, what would be the dollar in the situation, right? Everything that I'm talking about has merit, and there's a reason why I still do it and I still apply these rules. But you would have a way bigger return on your investment as far as the results go by just spending time in the positions that you want to be good at, right? And I almost made a post on it actually this morning talking about like the deep squat. I try to, and I go in seasons of being really good in this, and I go in seasons where I'm like, man, I'm so good at this, where I try to really just like spend a lot of time sitting in a deep squat. Like, think about the position of a deep squat, right? Like, as humans, we should be able to maintain a deep squat without having to raise our heels, or without having to use assistance, and be able to get there. You don't necessarily need to be able to do it with a perfectly straight back, but like, I should be able to get there, right? If you can't get there, like, you need to just practice that more often, because eventually you'll get there because your body adapts to the positions that you put it in. But think about it from an ankle perspective. The ankle's full range of motion is only going to be exposed in a deep squat. Knees full flexion, pretty close to the squat being the number one thing for that. Hips, right? Back, lower back, all these things. So if you were to think about the mobility that a lot of us are trying to work on with ankles, knees, hips, lower back stuff, you would probably have a better return by just spending majority of your time in a squat. And what I mean by majority of time is like, for most people, if I were to give you a 5-minute or 10-minute clock over the course of a day, that would feel like an eternity to a lot of people. But doing that will probably have more carryover to a benefit of actually improving the range of motion in those areas than foam rolling and doing isolated stretches for it, and then doing tib raises or glute bridges and things like that. Like, you just want to expose it to the thing that you're trying to get at, right? So, you know, a client was actually just here at noon today, and he was talking about like, hey, I just want to get better at squats. And like, I feel like squats has always been kind of like a limitation for me as far as strength goes. Like, my bench is really good, and I'm like, add more volume, add more frequency, or like just do it more times. Like, your body needs more input for it to actually have some type of adaptation the right way. So if you think about this in a mobility perspective, it's like you would have a way better improvement on your range of motion for your squat by sitting in a squat, right? And if you were to think about like the idea of hanging, the idea of walking more, the idea of playing sports more. Like, your body will get good at the ranges and movements you expose it to daily, right? So the problem with mobility and all the kind of detailed, nuanced stuff that we see all over the internet, they do work. Like, stretching works. Soft tissue and foam rolling and massage therapy works. But all they do is create an environment for you to be able to move a little bit easier into, right? It allows the nervous system to kind of facilitate a response of relaxation in a sense. But then strengthening it comes from just exposing the positions and the movements and getting stronger there. So that can happen isometrically by you sitting there in a squat too, right? That can happen from you hanging from a pull-up bar or hanging from a door jamb at your home, right? Like, that can happen from you, whatever it is, right? Like, there's just like one example I want to give you guys, right? Now, when it comes to training, that'll be the kind of the next part I want to talk about. Training is one of those things. I mean, obviously, being in this industry for 17 years, like, I know a decent amount of stuff when it comes to training and how to program, and through my own self-exploration and just obviously just utilizing it with the gym and then using it with clients on a personal scale. There's a lot of details that you can get lost in, right? So you think about writing programs and how to progressively overload them and how to periodize the cycles, and then what like the rep schemes and sets look, and the rest and the tempos, and all these details around programming. But the one thing, the dollar in this situation, is consistency of training itself, right? Obviously. Number two is challenging the muscle, right? Like, when you think about, most people want to go to the gym to get stronger, but most importantly, they really want to do it to build muscle for longevity purposes, to look better and feel more confident in themselves. And then strength, obviously, if you're an athlete or someone that has a little bit more of a performance goal behind it, like having the strength acquired from it as well is a big piece. But instead of focusing on how many reps and how many sets and what the tempo should be, should I do more eccentric? Should I do pyramid sets? Should I do drop sets? Like, what's the perfect recipe to get the strongest as possible? The reality is, you need to just be able to go into the gym and challenge the weights and the reps outside of a specific realm. So here's what I mean by that. If it says 4x10, and that day, that weight that you were supposed to use because your program has you going up 5 pounds every single week, for example, just something basic, but you feel like you can handle a little bit more weight that day, then do more weight or do more reps with the same weight, right? Or the exact opposite. There's going to be days where you go in there and that 10 reps is not going to feel possible, right? Or that weight's not going to feel as good. The biggest thing is making sure that you're just trying to challenge the muscle. And when you start to feel the burn, you then start to count and do a little bit more couple reps. Like, it's just all about the adaptation of growth, right? So adaptation comes from, here's a level of discomfort that my brain is telling me I've reached, but I know my body is capable of doing more. Okay, so I'm just going to push back. But over the macro, the goal is just progressive overload. The goal is to be able to run farther, or to run faster, or to be able to run with a lower heart rate, or to be able to use more weights, or to be able to use more weights with control, or to be able to do more reps with the same amount of weights. Like, something, as far as whatever you're measuring, you need to objectively be able to progressively overload that, right? And you can track these things and know it if you really want to be detailed about it, or you can just go into the gym and then just really understand, like, okay, what movement am I trying to do, or what muscle am I trying to grow? And from a muscle development standpoint, like for bodybuilding, I never tracked weights, really ever, right? I really didn't. I would go in there and be like, I'm going to do 8 to 12 reps or 10 to 12 reps today. And some days it might have been 2 plates on that machine, and some days it might have been 2 plates and a quarter, some days it might have been 3 plates. Like, whatever I was doing, I was making sure that in that moment, that current day, in that current session, that current set, that current rep, I was challenging myself past a level of comfort, right? Like, I wanted to reach discomfort and then push a little bit harder, because that's where all the growth exists. And that's something that you can carry on for pretty much all of your life, right? So don't get lost in the details. Just get lost in the challenging aspect, or don't get lost. Focus on challenging the muscle, reaching a place of discomfort, and pushing past that threshold. If all you do is push to a point of discomfort and then slow down or stop, you're never really getting over that threshold that where the growth exists, right? Third thing I want to talk about is nutrition. Nutrition, I think, out of, like I said earlier, I think is probably one of the most confusing spaces for a consumer and a client to be in, because there is so many different ways to approach it, right? There's keto, there's intermittent fasting, there's counting calories, right? There's all these different things that exist inside of this nutrition space. And the problem with it is a lot of people are very dogmatic on their point of views, which makes it even more confusing for a lot of people. During the pandemic, I kind of took the opportunity to spend a lot more time. Like, I read a lot that year. I was just thinking about that actually like 2 mornings ago. I was like reading, and I was like, I haven't been reading as much as I'd normally like to, and that's kind of probably a sleeping schedule thing. But the 2020, I read 52 books, or 52 or 53 books, whatever. It's like low 50s, which is crazy. Like, definitely the most books I've ever read in a year. But I also had plenty of time to be able to take advantage of it. This year, I'm like, maybe, I don't know, maybe on book 5, if that. Like, I'm just reading so much slower. I'm not dedicating as much time to it. But back to the point. The nutrition stuff, I spent a lot of time kind of doing. I did some like online courses, and I started reading a lot more books. And then I started to understand, even from the consumer side, I was like, oh, this is why it's so confusing. Because, like, everyone kind of has the same point of view, or a different point of view. So for me, what I really tried to extrapolate from everything was like, what are the parallels of all these things, right? What are the dollars that I can pick up? Instead of just focusing on all these little high-level details. And the number one thing to understand is like, okay, if we want to lose weight, we want to be healthy, we want to live a long time, we need to eat in a caloric deficit, right? We need to prioritize protein, we need to prioritize fiber. What's like one way that I can really, really control my calories? I can prioritize my protein, I can prioritize fiber. And the answer is eat whole foods 90% of the time. Don't eat foods that come in a bag, that come in a package, that have a barcode on it. Eat foods that you have to shop around in the perimeter for. So you go pick your vegetables, you go pick your fruits, your starchy things, right? Your root vegetables, all those, right? You go get your meats next, right? You pick your fish, you pick your eggs, maybe in your dairy if you want to be out there a little bit. That's still technically a whole food, even though it comes in a package. I mean, a lot of these things obviously come with barcodes, but you know what I'm talking about here. And if you were to just make majority of your diet whole foods, that automatically is going to regulate hunger, because when you're eating whole foods, you're getting protein, you're getting healthy fats, you're eating fruits and vegetables and produce, right? Root vegetables, including the starchy things. You're getting your fiber, right, which is going to slow down digestion. You're getting all the nutrients, so automatically that's going to regulate your calories. And also by eating things that come from planet Earth, such as animals and plants, you're going to get protein, right? You're going to get all the nutrients that your body needs to thrive to actually be able to lose weight. So you solve almost every single problem, right? Now, there's details, like, I think it's cool to have some intermittent fasting in there. I think it's cool to cycle calories and maybe cycle carbs. There's nuance that can fall into every part of this conversation that still is important. But I'm talking for the majority of us listening to this, for the basics, for the general population, like, what's the one thing you can do that's just not going to complicate it? And if you just think about, okay, if I buy Whole Foods, it requires me to cook more. And if I cook all my food that I shop for, there's a pretty good chance you're probably going to be in a decent place, right? So that's always one thing I think about. Like, for a lot of this, and this is why I wanted to kind of talk about in today's podcast, is like, don't overcomplicate things to an extent where you actually prevent yourself from starting. There are so many people that I know that have shiny object syndrome, where they just jump from thing to thing to thing. You see this in relationships, you see this in jobs, you see this in programming with training. I would say one of the things that it frustrates me, because I know that people are just hurting their own potential, but there's a lot of people that will join a gym, and we see this with ours all the time. Like, our gym is no different than any others in that aspect. It's like, we're like, hey, I want to try this for 3 or 6 months and see if it's right for me, right? And not to say that you shouldn't try to find the right thing for you, but when it comes to training, we all know we should be doing cardio. We all know that we should be doing strength training. We all know that we should be doing some level of mobility. So for us, I will selfishly say, and this is my bias, that like, as far as mobility and strength training, like, this is going to be the foundation that everyone should be doing. This is why I do the same programming that I write for my clients, because I believe it's what we should be doing as humans. And then go do aerobic stuff outside the gym. Go run, go play sports, go whatever you got to do. But the amount of times that people quit a gym because they think that I'm going to do this for X amount of time, right? That is the worst way to think about your training. Things, and this is why I put lifestyles in the business name. You're supposed to make this a lifestyle, right? And if you want to make this sustainable, yeah, it needs to be fun, it needs to be enjoyable to a certain extent, but you need to understand there's going to be a lot of things that maybe aren't the funnest, or I don't know if that's a word, but you're going to take your time and your experience and maturity in that space to really delegate down and figure out exactly dialing down what you want for your life. And the one thing that I always thought about with dieting, for example, is dieting for me wasn't enjoyable because I looked at it differently for a while. But when I started eating real foods, and I was like, oh, I am allowed to eat red meat. Oh, I am allowed to have eggs. I am allowed to have fat. I am allowed to have fruit. Like, all these little dogmatic points of view of like, oh, I thought fruit was sugar and you shouldn't be eating too much fruit. And like, oh, you shouldn't eat red meat because it's going to cause cancer. You shouldn't have eggs and butter because it's going to raise your cholesterol. And we're now realizing this is just all a bunch of bullshit propaganda that was given to us to be able to eat certain things that are packaged that has money back behind it. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, now I actually enjoy eating correctly. I like whole foods. I think cooking is something that I enjoy. I think my own home-cooked meals tend to be better than most restaurants that I go out for. And it's just like, it's better quality, it's better ingredients, it's at home, it's cheaper, it's more affordable. and it's more sustainable, right? And that's something that I think, as far as the mindset goes for everyone, like, you need to just get out of this, like, okay, it's kind of slowing down, I'm not doing the right thing, like, I'm just going to jump to the next thing, right? The most successful people in all areas of life, in my experience, are the people that just really, really do the basics really well, right? Like, they just master the basics and they just repeat that at a higher scale and more volume, right? Now, a lot of times I'll get that as like, well, like, oh, you have good genetics, or like, oh, you work in a gym, so it must be nice. It's like, well, yeah, but like, I also been working out for 18 years straight and I have not missed a week yet. So like, the consistency of just doing the same thing. And guess what? I haven't really been very detailed with my programming in a very long time. And I mean very long time, years. And I still am very happy with my body. I have good body composition. I feel at a very good place. I could be obviously in a better place if I was more detailed, and that's where some of these nuances kind of matter. But for the most part, for most of us, it's like, there's going to be a point where you're just chasing the next thing, right? So it's like, learn to just find the basics and make that a forever consistent piece of your life, right? So the next one I want to talk about is kind of stress, right? Like, stress is something that I think, since the pandemic, I've had more and more conversations with both myself internally, with people around me, obviously with a lot of clients. And there's all these things, and I was trying to figure, okay, like, what's the best way to solve stress? Is it journaling? Is it meditation? Is it red light therapy? Is it my sauna? Is it going on walks? Is it nature? Is it me getting a therapist? Like, what are all these things that are going to solve it? And the thing that I realized, the dollar in this situation, is action. The more time I spend working on doing something, the less stress I have. The more time I have time to think without action about what I should be doing, the more stressed I am. And action could be me having tough conversations with the people at work or friends or whatever it is, significant other, or it could be me not working out, or it could be me not doing the work I need to be doing for my job. It could be me being lazy and not cooking at home. It could be me giving myself half-assed workouts, like, whatever it is. But the reason why I'm stressed, in my experience, is because I wasn't taking action on those things. And the more times that I've spent taking action and doing the work, the happier I've always been. I made an Instagram post on this last week, or this week, whatever it was. And one thing that I've always found interesting is, a lot of times I'll be in fit starts and a lot of people will be like, I want to look good. It's like, it's almost like they're nervous to say it. I'm like, why is that something that you're like shy to say? I'm like, I don't know. It feels kind of superficial. Why would looking good be superficial? Once looking good, we all want to look good. And the people that don't want to look good maybe have just totally given up on the idea of like the work that's required to get there. But there's no reason for any human on this planet to ever feel ashamed or shy that they want to look good. They want to be lean. They want to have a six-pack. They want to be strong. Or they want to be rich, right? And I think this is kind of another part of the propaganda a little bit for me sometimes, with how society has shaped this idea that you don't need to be lean, rich, or strong to be happy. Which is true to a certain extent. But the one thing that people forget is, on a deep core level of this, the habits that you have to create, the discipline that's required to get there, the education that's required to get there, the lifestyle that you have to live, the networking and the people you need to surround yourself with in order to achieve these things that might feel superficial or fake to you, those deep values are the thing that are going to make you happy. And this is why it's so important for me. Like, so when I say, like, yes, I am money hungry. Yes, I do want to look good. Yes, I do want these other things. Like, on these things that could be superficial from the outside perspective, those things themselves are not going to make me happy. There's not a number in my bank account that I think would make me happy. I'm always going to want more. There's not a number in the gym that's going to make me happy. There's not a number on the scale. So there's not a number of followers. There's not a number of anything that I think it's like, the number is not a destination. The number is just like a tally on where we're kind of currently at. It's a pulse, So we always want to get better. But those things that you have to do in order to get those things, those values that you've adopted for you are what are going to make you great, right? So think about this with all things. I don't want to keep rambling on because I'm already kind of 20 minutes into this thing. But like, when you think about the sleep hacks and you think about the mindset stuff or anything in your life, the one thing that you need to remember is focus on picking up the dollars and not picking up the pennies, right? Don't step over dollars for pennies, which basically means that focus on doing the foundational basics all the time. And the more that you can do the basics consistently over a long period of time, the more likely you will be that you'll be happy and successful for the rest of your life. The more times that you spend on the details thinking about what to do next or what to change when you're skipping all the basics, this is like someone that takes supplements with a shitty diet, the more times you're going to have lack of results, and you're going to be frustrated that those things don't work, when in reality, all you could have done is just dumb it down and focus on the basics more often. Okay? All right, guys. Well, that's it for me. I will see you next week. That's episode 114 of Pursuit of Balance. See you guys later.